Texans met with Will Anderson at Alabama's Pro Day. Obviously, we talk a lot about Bryce Young. We've talked a lot about CJ Stroud. The quarterback is what's generating the most dialogue when it comes to the Texans leading up to the draft, which, by the way, less than 5 weeks away now. We're 34 days away from day one being concluded. But I want to get into this Will Anderson thing and the possibility of Will Anderson being a Texan. I want to attack it from multiple angles, multiple scenarios, because the reality is that in the draft, there's always that big surprise. There's always the player who slides. And really, there's all of the above. And when the Texans are sitting at 2-12, I think we assume rightfully that they're going to take a quarterback. But what if the quarterback that they like most, and they do like a quarterback most, which is why they were even entertaining the possibility of trading up? What if that quarterback is not there, and the possibility of perhaps drafting Will Anderson increases? It is the Locker Room, number one source for Texans daily digital content. I'm Landry Locker. You can hear me Monday through Friday, 10 to 2 on Sports Radio 610, home of the Texans and the Odyssey app. What would the reaction be? Let's just pretend that you get Will Anderson the way that most people feel you would have to get Will Anderson. What would the reaction be if the Houston Texans selected Will Anderson number two overall? I think there's a couple of possibilities, and you're never going to get when you have this large of a fan base, you're never going to get like a unanimous 100% reaction, because fans have minds of their own. It's an individual game, and you can't generalize the overall thoughts. There can be a majority of approval, et cetera, but with something like this, there's not going to be a consensus on the reaction of Will Anderson being selected. I think there would be a large portion of fans. I think there would be two things, two possibilities. There would be a large portion of fans that want the quarterback. They don't care if it's CJ. They don't care if it's Bryce. They want the quarterback. And if it's not a quarterback, no matter what, there's going to be initial outrage, anger. Internet's going to break. There's going to be trending topics. So I do think there would be an element of that. I also think that given the fact that people feel good about what the Texans did when they hired their coach in DeMeco Ryans, that there is a little bit more trust now than there would have been had, say, Bill O'Brien or Lovie Smith or someone else done this, Jack Easterby. If it had been done with them, I don't think there would have been trust. I do think there's a larger portion, not saying it's going to be the majority, but there's a larger portion of people that would be okay if you selected Will Anderson number two in the draft instead of a quarterback. Now, there's another question that I want to attack here. Is there another path to potentially getting Will Anderson on the Houston Texans? Let's just pretend that the Texans don't want to take a quarterback at number two. Is the better option to trade? Would the better option be to trade back? Do you trade back, and who do you trade with? And if you're liking Will Anderson, where would you feel safe in thinking you're going to get Will Anderson? Is there a better option to trade? What could the path look like? Could the Texans take a quarterback number two, and then knowing that they have the 12th pick and knowing they have all this draft equity, find a scenario where they trade up and get both Will Anderson and the quarterback? Think about it. You think the Texans are going to take a quarterback. You think that Carolina is going to take a quarterback. Arizona is going to trade. You got to think that team's going to take a quarterback. We don't know what Indianapolis is going to do. There's a possibility that someone likes maybe Tyree Wilson more than Will Anderson, so he starts falling back to 5. You get to 6. Jalen Carter's kind of slid. He's the number 1 pick. Let's say you get to 6 and Will Anderson is still on the board. Could Nick Caserio then call his old buddy, Josh McDaniels, and maybe put together a trade to jump up 5 spots? Now, let's look at the Raiders roster. The Raiders right now are in an interesting spot. They brought in Jimmy Garoppolo. They have Max Crosby. They have Chandler Jones. Do the Raiders want to invest more on the edge, or could the Raiders be looking to stockpile picks and maybe add some assets? Could Nick Caserio call his old buddy, his John Carroll guy, his Patriot way buddy, Josh McDaniels, and potentially make a deal? What is the path to getting Will Anderson? Is it just as simple as take him at number 2, or could we see a fall? I had Cole Thompson on the other day. You don't want to miss that. He was given some scenarios. Tyree Wilson's a really good player out of Texas Tech. We've seen crazier things than Tyree Wilson go over Will Anderson in the NFL draft. He's still really high on Will Anderson, but we've seen crazier things. So could the Texans could there be a scenario where the Texans are adding Will Anderson and a quarterback? That would be a very, very interesting scenario, and I don't think it's too crazy to think that could happen once you start laying out a path of how that would go down if they take their quarterback and then they decide they want to make a move. Now, I don't think he gets to them all the way to 12. I don't think that there's any chance in hell at that, but how desperate are the Raiders? Are the Raiders going to see someone there at 7 that they just have to have? Or could the Texans trade one of those extra firsts that they had last year and go and swap with the Raiders and go up there and get Will Anderson? I think that's a possibility. I think we're looking at the Texans meeting with Will Anderson. By the way, everybody meets with everybody. That's the beauty of this whole thing, is that the dialogue is good and all that, but everybody meets with everybody. So, it's just a lot of discussion. What's the path for Will Anderson? What would your reaction be if they got him number 2 overall? And if they did draft him number 2 overall, let's pretend they just stay put. They take him number 2 overall, and Bryce Young or CJ Stroud is on the board at 3 in a traditional way. I still think if you're thinking this way with Will Anderson, a trade back would make sense. Maybe not with Indianapolis, but a trade back would make sense so that you can get some more draft equity. And maybe you have to take either Tyree Wilson or Will Anderson. So you're making that decision if you're going to do that. I don't know what they do. Maybe they just think that they can't miss out on Will Anderson, but the other question, and maybe the most important one, what would the QB situation be if they did take Will Anderson at number 2? Are we comparing the Davis Mills, Daniel Jones reclamation projects of last year, where Daniel Jones was getting talked about the same way Mills is, and he played some decent ball for the Giants? Are we talking about Case Keenum? Is the Case Keenum mafia coming through? Don't know. But there are just a couple of scenarios that come up with the Will Anderson thing, and the questions, just to reset them. What would the reaction be? Is there a better trade option? What is the path? Could there be a path outside of just taking him at number 2? What would the quarterback situation be? And let's just keep a close eye on Nick and Josh at number 7. They got a relationship going on. And hey, Raiders also visited with Bryce Young. Just saying. No, they're bringing in Jimmy. They did visit with Bryce Young. Keep an eye on the Raiders up there. That's kind of a wild card there. And we know that Nick's got a relationship with the coach. He's got a relationship with the GM. Let's just keep a close eye on that. Subscribe, comment, like. We'll keep this going tonight. We're going to have a live stream with someone who was at the Alabama Pro Day. We'll try to make sense of all this pro day chatter. Nick Caserio getting analyzed, I'll say, for not being at pro days. I think it's a little bit silly. We'll hear what Nick had to say about that. We'll hear from you, and we'll sprint into this weekend. It's been a real active day for the Texans. We started out with Tunsil and Cooks news on Sunday. 2 big signings with Singletary and Schultz on Monday. And then all these pro days. It's been a wild time. There really hasn't been any downtime for Texans content and Texans discussion, which is a beautiful thing. And no matter what happens, no matter what the dialogue is, just remember, when it comes to this Texans game, this Texans chatter, we are all in this together. Go win the Friday.